A newly released classified memo provides new details on the scope of Robert Mueller's investigative mandate. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein explicitly authorized Mueller to investigate whether Paul Manafort colluded with the Russians in the 2016 election and to probe any crimes related to payments that Manafort received from the Ukrainian government. So we'll get into that. Also, the White House is making a new legislative push aimed at cracking down on illegal immigration, as President Trump is fanning fears that U.S. policies have weakened border security. Now, the Justice Department is looking to impose quotas on immigration judges.
President Trump once again slamming the Justice Department as the administration looks to speed up deportations. The president also taking aim at Democrats for blocking, he says, his nominations and ramping up his war on Amazon, whose stock continues to plummet. Meantime, a source close to the White House says that EPA Chief Scott Pruitt's job is now in jeopardy. It comes as the White House is looking into whether Pruitt violated ethics laws after it was revealed that he was renting a room well below market value from the family of an energy lobbyist. Let's begin our coverage with CNN's Shimon Prokupecz. He's live in Washington with our top story. Shimon, this new memo, what does it tell us?
Yeah, that's right, Jim. This new memo certainly reveals to us for the first time what the scope of the special counsel investigation is. Really in plain sight here, we can see that the collusion investigation that is being conducted by the special counsel is still very much at play, is still ongoing, specifically as it relates to Paul Manafort. Now, the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who is overseeing this investigation, who oversees Bob Mueller, in this memo was basically written, to basically laying out the scope by which Mueller and his team could conduct their investigation. Now, this memo authorized them to investigate, according to the memo, crimes by Manafort of collusion with the Russian government officials with respect to the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 election. It also then, authorizes Bob Mueller and his team to look at some of the Ukrainian work that Paul Manafort has done, and including the fact that he had been charged with some of the money laundering, the government claiming that some of the money that he received from the Ukrainians that he was working for and then hid it in offshore accounts, didn't pay taxes for it. So this has been sort of a controversy here in terms of on the side of the Manafort team. They've been claiming that Mueller has overstepped his boundaries and that his scope in the investigation of Manafort and his past and his money dealings. And clearly this filing shows us that that investigation was authorized by the Deputy Attorney General.
Okay, good to know, Shimon. Thank you very much for setting all of that up for us. Joining us now to talk about it, we have CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large Chris Cillizza and CNN legal analyst Michael Zeldin, who worked with Robert Mueller. So, Michael, let me start with you. Didn't we know already that Bob Mueller was looking into Paul Manafort and his dealings with Russia? Why is this a revelation?
Well, it's not a revelation in the sense that this is straight in the middle of Mueller's mandate. The public May 17th appointment of Mueller and the mandate by Rosenstein says he shall carry on the investigation that the FBI started back in March, and that includes collusion and interference. The August 2nd memo that Shimon was just speaking about further elaborates to Mueller privately what the scope of that could include by naming named individuals and particular activities that they undertook. Mueller has clearly the opportunity to investigate Manafort by virtue of this, but most significantly, he has the right to look at the predicate potentially for the collusion, which is Manafort's Ukrainian dealings several years before the Trump campaign. So the opportunity that Mueller has to use the Ukrainian information that was now part of the indictment as a predicate for his understanding or investigating the 2016 collusion investigation is much more plain for everyone to see, and undermines significantly Manafort's claim in his civil lawsuit that Mueller was acting outside of his mandate.
Listen, it seems you'll hear from the president, you hear from many of the president's supporters that Manafort's charges, yeah, he's been charged, but it's all about business, it's all about corruption, etc. But Chris Cillizza, I suppose if it's not news here, the reaffirmation here is that no, it's an open line of inquiry as to whether there was collusion, including Paul Manafort, the president's campaign chairman at the time.
Yeah, Jim, I think it's important, too, to mention Donald Trump here, in only that Donald Trump has asserted over and over again the idea of that Mueller's too broad, sweeping, witch hunt, hoax. And this makes quite clear that Donald Trump's Justice Department, at least, said that, yes, as it relates to Paul Manafort, looking into Russian collusion is part of the mandate, expressly said this. I think that's important, number one. Number two, I think the downplaying of the Manafort role in all of this by the Trump world is slightly disingenuous, only in that, number one, he wasn't a minor player for a short period of time. His title was campaign chairman. Yeah. He was the campaign manager at a critical time during the campaign. And number two, yes, what we know publicly as it relates to Paul Manafort is about his dealings, financial dealings primarily with the Ukraine. But that's not necessarily everything. I always remind people, ongoing investigation. It's important to keep that frame in mind.
How do you see it?
And Chris, I think one of the interesting questions will be is whether the knowledge that the Trump Justice Department specifically sanctified investigation into collusion by Manafort with the Russians, whether that increases the president's paranoia and pique at his own Justice Department.
Yeah, look, I think you're right, John. I think all these questions fundamentally get to how does the president react in some ways? Because the big kahuna, the big thing we're waiting for is, does Donald Trump sit down with Bob Mueller or not, right? That's sort of our big outstanding question. Trump, at least publicly, has indicated he wants to. I actually buy that only in that I think Trump has total and complete self-confidence and likes the idea of a mano-a-mano against Bob Mueller, who he thinks he can outwit and outsmart. But that's the key. So anything, Manafort, anything else that plays into his psyche as it relates to that sit-down, I think is important to us.
Michael, there's also some new Wall Street Journal reporting about this possible meeting between Roger Stone, longtime Trump associate and friend, and WikiLeaks Julian Assange. I think we've already gone over this because I've interviewed Sam Nunberg about this. What Roger Stone says is he was joking with Sam Nunberg, his friend and sort of mentee, that he had dinner one night with Julian Assange. He says he was trying to get out of a dinner with Sam Nunberg. And Sam Nunberg took it seriously, and he says, I think, reported that to Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller is looking into whether this is possible. Is it possible that Roger Stone actually had dinner with Julian Assange, who was holed up in an embassy?
Most likely not, but I think it misses the broader point here, which is that Mueller is looking at the counterintelligence investigation with two aspects. One is the social media one, and we saw the indictment. The second is the hacking of the Democratic National Committee and Podesta, and then as to each, whether there was collusion or coordination. With respect to the first, the social media, it's going to be Cambridge Analytica and the Kushner data analytics operation. With respect to the hacking, it's going to be Roger Stone and Don Jr. and their conversations with WikiLeaks around the DNC Podesta hacking. So whether or not Roger Stone had dinner, whether he was kidding with Sam Nunberg, whether Nunberg misunderstood, is beside the point of, I think, that Mueller has in his sights the hacking from the counterintelligence standpoint and the coordination through WikiLeaks, and Roger Stone and Don Jr., I think, are in his crosshairs for that.
And, Michael, I think it's important to clarify that, first of all, this report from the Wall Street Journal that Roger Stone pushed back and said that he was in L.A. the night that he allegedly said, that he did say in an email that he had dinner with Assange, but that Assange has had guests over his time holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy. But the larger pattern is Roger Stone saying in public, in tweets and other ways, that he'd been in communication with WikiLeaks, saying, oh, Podesta's time in a barrel is coming, before the Podesta emails are released. And that intersection of interest.
That's the thing. It's not isolated. I mean, the famous tweet, Hillary Clinton is done on X date. I mean, there's more than one back and forth between him and Ronald Stone and Roger Stone. Thanks very much.
That's right. Which is why the dinner is not really. I was going to say, which is really why the dinner is beside the point. It's really the broader communications between Stone and WikiLeaks.
Right, and the timing of those communications. Thanks very much to all of you. President Trump returning to a hardline immigration stance with a series of tweets sending a clear message to his base that he intends to crack down. CNN's Abby Phillips, she is live at the White House this morning with more. There was a lot of tweets yesterday on immigration. What are we expecting today?
Well, good morning, Jim. President Trump is pivoting hard to his base and to an immigration message that we saw a lot during the campaign. Over the last several days, he's tweeted 9 times about U.S. immigration laws, and we are now learning that the White House is planning to renew an effort to pressure Congress to crack down on immigration laws. President Trump continuing to vent about U.S. immigration policies, calling current laws weak and an Obama joke, and urging Congress to act. The White House beginning another push to pass a series of hardline measures that failed to gain steam last fall, including removing protections that prevent the immediate deportation of undocumented children and allowing authorities to keep families in detention for longer periods, awaiting deportation decisions, according to the New York Times. This effort coming after the president declared that any deal to protect Dreamers is dead.
The Democrats have really let them down. It's a shame. And now people are taking advantage of DACA, and that's a shame. It should have never happened.
Didn't you kill DACA, sir? Didn't you kill DACA?
So this is this.
President Trump announced he intended to end the Dreamer program last fall, and immigration negotiations collapsed earlier this year after the president signaled he was open to a bipartisan solution.
This group and others from the Senate, from the House, comes back with an agreement, I'm signing it. I mean, I will be signing it. I'm not going to say, oh, gee, I want this or I want that.
Democrats offered $25 billion for the president's border wall in exchange for citizenship for Dreamers. The White House was not satisfied, saying there were too few measures to curb immigration overall. Sources tell CNN that a number of the president's allies warned him this weekend that his base thinks he's softening on immigration. The president is also ramping up his attacks on Amazon, accusing the company of hurting the U.S. Postal Service and brick-and-mortar stores, arguments he made on the campaign trail.
And believe me, if I become president, oh, do they have problems.
The latest criticism causing Amazon stock to drop 5%. President Trump also renewing his rebuke on his own Justice Department, accusing the DOJ and the FBI of slow-walking documents requested by Congress for ongoing investigations, calling the institutions an embarrassment. This, as sources tell CNN that embattled EPA Chief Scott Pruitt's job may be in jeopardy. The president is reportedly angry with recent reports that Pruitt rented a room for well under market value from the family of an energy lobbyist. The New York Times reports that the EPA signed off on a proposal from a Canadian company linked to the lobbying firm last month, the same time Pruitt was renting the condo. The EPA and the firm deny that there is any connection. And a spokeswoman for the EPA says that Pruitt is focused on advancing President Trump's agenda amid all of this controversy.
He hashed immigration policies that were not successful on Capitol Hill last fall. Let's bring back Chris Cillizza and the associate editor of Real Clear Politics, A.B. Stoddard, with us as well. A.B., what's the driving force behind? I mean, that was quite a tweet storm yesterday, clearly a new focus of the president. Is this about the base, or is it about the president's disappointment? He doesn't have his border wall yet.
Well, it's both, Jim. I mean, he's very upset by the reaction that he sees in conservative media and from his base to signing that spending bill a couple weeks ago, the omnibus, and he's also upset that it didn't include wall funding, and well, what he can really say is new wall funding, because there's $1.6 billion, but it's sort of for some fixes and existing fencing and stuff, and it's not really what he wants to deliver on in terms of his campaign promise. And so he's very frustrated that he's taking this heat And he actually did make a push for a DACA deal in the closing days, very last minute, very disorganized. And it was rebuffed by congressional Republicans. And then you did see sort of this blip where the White House said, oh, no, he's not for a DACA deal, one for one, protection for Dreamers in exchange for wall funding. But he's still fuming that he doesn't have one on the table. And that's why also, obviously, this caravan news is fueling it. But that's really something that until and unless he has something he can call a wall, he's going to keep grumbling this way because he wants to fulfill this promise.
Chris, you just heard AB say that the people who killed the nascent grand bargain were congressional Republicans. Democrats had offered $25 billion for the wall. By AB's accounting, that's around $24 billion more than he got in the omnibus spending bill. Why the anger at Democrats, and why the apparent lack of interest anymore in putting together another grand bargain?
Because I think he realizes, number one, it is very unlikely to happen on the terms he wants, John. And number two, because I think AB touched on it, never underestimate his sensitivity to how he is covered, particularly by the conservative media. He's been bashed by people like Ann Coulter, people who have long been Laura Ingraham, people who have long been his supporters. Believe you can't. Chris Christie. I don't know how Scott Pruitt survives this because, again, it's not one bad headline. AB just ripped through about 6 bad headlines. I think what you're seeing here is probably finding someone to take Scott Pruitt's job.